According to historians, the modern period of Indian history began with the death of the last great Mughal emperor Aurangzeb in 1707 CE. Though people from different European countries had reached the Indian soil much earlier, it was only under the successors of Aurangzeb, collectively called the later Mughals, that the road to their political, economic and cultural domination over the Indian subcontinent was paved. The process of this domination, as we shall read later in this book, began with the grant of trading rights by Indian rulers to the European trading companies and reached a high pitch with conflicts among them for supremacy in trade and politics. After successfully fighting a series of battles against their French rivals and some powerful Indian rulers, the British emerged as the dominant power in the subcontinent. While the period of 5 decades between 1707 CE and 1757 CE marks the formative years of British rule in India, it also saw the decline and disintegration of the Mughal Empire, characterized by the emergence of regional powers such as Bengal, Hyderabad, Awadh, and the Marathas. Apart from the trade wars that occasionally brought the European trading companies into conflict over the issues of their mercantile interests and aspirations, a number of politically important events that took place during this period did not directly relate to the rise and expansion of the British power. We have already read about most of these events in Class 7. In this class, we shall touch upon the trade wars among the European companies and certain other related events in some detail to suggest how the transition from Mughal India to British India came about. The focus of our study, however, will be on the events that took place during the period of about 190 years between 1757 and 1947, when India became independent from the British rule after a long struggle for freedom. Let us start with a discussion on the factors rooted in European history itself that accounted for the transformation of the British from a group of traders into the architect of India's destiny before the country attained independence. We shall also discuss why the period of British rule in India is also called the colonial period of Indian history. Industrial Revolution. Industrial Revolution in Europe was a series of great changes which influenced the growth of the modern European society. These changes were caused by the introduction of new technologies and invention of new mechanical devices in Europe between the 18th and the 19th centuries. They increased the quantity as well as the quality of industrial production while reducing the production cost. Manufacturing, agriculture, mining, transport, and technology were some of the key areas that were influenced by the Industrial Revolution. As a result, the social, economic, and cultural lives of different European countries underwent complete transformation. England was the first European country where the Industrial Revolution started. Subsequently, it spread throughout Europe, North America, and the rest of the world. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, England's industrial production increased manifold within a very short span of time. Generally, a competition began among the European powers, including England, France, and others, to explore those regions beyond their own frontiers that would serve as markets for their products and also ensure a regular supply of raw materials to support their domestic industries. This marked the beginning of the age of colonization. Colonization of India. In 1600, a group of English traders founded the English East India Company, EEIC, in London. We have read in Class 7 how Thomas Roe, the envoy of King James I, secured from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir certain trading rights for the merchants of the EEIC. About a century later, Farrukh Siyar, A later Mughal ruler granted important trading rights to English merchants through a royal firman. Following its victory in the Battle of Plassey in 1757, the EEIC became the dominant political power in the Indian subcontinent, and gradually most of the Indian subcontinent became part of a British colony. Thus, the company that came to India as a trading organization became the master of the Indian subcontinent. India became a colony of the British, who ruled the country till 1947. We will read about this in more detail later in this book, Indian Nationalism. In this book, we shall frequently come across the term nationalism. Essentially, this term signifies love for the nation in the context of a country under the rule of some other country. It reflects a strong desire to get independence from foreign rule. The revolt of 1857, as we shall read later, was the first great expression of Indian nationalism. This revolt saw a number of provincial rulers of India, supported by their people, as well as sepoys or Indian soldiers in the British army, rebel against the colonial rule. Though the revolt was suppressed, it made the people living in different regions of India realize that if they stood united, it was possible to overthrow the British. So the concept of India as a nation and Indians as a people, a united country, and not just a collection of smaller provinces and local identities, took shape. In a later chapter of this book, we shall read in detail about Indian nationalism and how it paved the way for the growth of the freedom struggle, eventually leading to our independence from British rule. Economic changes. The most striking economic change during the British period came in the land revenue system. During the British rule, British officials went around surveying the countryside and fixing the land revenue. Land revenue was the most important source of income for the government. Though the land revenue arrangements made by the British differed in different parts of the country, land revenue was fixed at very high rates. This led to extreme hardships, frequent famines, peasant migrations, and rebellions across the Indian subcontinent. During the colonial period, the pre-existing patterns of trade also underwent many changes. When British traders came to India, they bought spices, calicos, and fine cotton clothes and sold them in England. These were usually paid for in bullion or silver. Later, many peasants were forced to cultivate opium, which is the British sent to China, in lieu of tea. When India became a full-fledged colony, she exported raw materials like jute and cotton to England, which fed British factories in Scotland and Manchester. These finished goods were then sold back to India at much higher prices than those at which raw materials were bought from India. Overall, trade which was in favor of India at the beginning of the period became very unfavorable for the country. Another striking change was the destruction of traditional industries such as weaving, pottery, iron smelting, brass works, etc. They were destroyed since they often posed a challenge to British trade and manufacturing. This phenomenon came to be known as deindustrialization. Gradually, the industrialization of India began in the latter half of the 19th century, following a slew of efforts made by the likes of J.R.D. Tata and others. Cultural changes. We have seen in previous classes, especially with reference to the Mughals, how new sets of people bring in their cultural practices. This often results in a totally new culture. This change was also witnessed during the colonial period in many aspects of Indian culture. Art, architecture, language, literature, and in fact even the way Indians dressed changed considerably during this period. We shall read more on this in a separate chapter. In the field of architecture, the city of New Delhi, especially what is known as Lutyens Delhi, is a good example of colonial architecture which was a mixture of Indian and European styles. Similarly, in the area of art, the Bengal School is a good example where Indian themes were expressed through Western styles. In the area of literature, Indian writings in English, which is now very popular around the world, began during this period. Social changes. Some of the important social changes that took place during this period were around the issues of caste system, tribal societies, and treatment of women. We shall read about them in detail in a later chapter. Caste barriers among the Hindus began to grow weak during the colonial period due to a widespread reform movement led by Raja Ram Mohan Roy, Dayanand Saraswati, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, etc., and some significant legislations by the government that extended support to it. A lot of efforts were also made to improve the condition of women. The banning of sati, the encouragement of widow remarriage, framing of legislations to prevent child marriage, and regulations to educate the girl child were some important developments in this area. Tribal societies witnessed dramatic changes during this period. The most important change was an effort to integrate them into mainstream society. The second important set of social changes occurred with changes in the educational system. The British required a large number of people who could run different levels of administration. They therefore made a serious effort to overhaul the traditional system of education. Eventually, it led to the birth of the English-educated middle class of India, which not only produced bureaucrats and administrators at the service of the British rulers, but also some of the outstanding leaders of the Indian national movement about whom we shall read later.